Hello, welcome back to a J Love video. Today I'm here with my amazing, awesome friend Maeve, and Maeve's going to share her story with us, and we're going to let Maeve take it over.
Yeah, well, thanks, J-Love. I'm
You're
excited to be in
welcome.
your video. I've known J-Love for a long time, and he's inspired me a lot, so it's exciting to get to share. I wanted to share a little bit about kind of my story of making my faith my own, because I grew up in a Christian household, and I knew about Jesus from a young age, but it wasn't until I was older that I really was able to kind of take that faith and really make it something that I lived out. And so, when I was younger, I went to church and heard about Jesus, and I heard a lot about God, but I was really actually afraid of him. I had a lot of fear because I thought that he was just this big scary guy that was looking down to see if I was doing everything perfect and how I was living. And I was really afraid of, like, what if I'm not doing it well enough? What will happen to me when I die? And all those types of things.
Yeah.
And then in high school, I actually had an uncle that I was really close with who died. And that really scared me because I hadn't really known anyone close to me that passed away before. And so I felt like, that really brought up all my fears even more. And I was going to church at the time, and it was really helpful. And I felt like God was really speaking to me, but I still hadn't quite grasped what that meant for my life. And that was my junior year. And then fast forward to after my senior year, I moved from Idaho all the way here to California to go to Cal Poly, which was super exciting. And I'm so glad that God called me here to such a beautiful place. But one of the very first things that happened was my first week here, I met someone from a church that invited me to come to like the on-campus church. And I went to the very first service, and I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, the people here really know God. Like, I've never seen people that were so interested in their faith and so like active and just so real. And the first service I went to, I think it was like 2 hours, but I didn't even notice because I was just so into it, and I was just enjoying the worship. And and so I started going to a small group and started growing my faith more. But really what God spoke to me more than anything was to let go of that fear that I had of him, of what would happen to me and what he would do. And there's a verse in Hebrews chapter 12 that talks about two different mountains. It talks about Mount Sinai, where in the Old Testament, where God's people where Moses went, the people weren't even allowed to go, because it talks about how that was a mountain of fear. And there was trembling and there was thunder, and God, it was so scary that people didn't even want to go meet with God. And I felt like that's how my life used to be, like even though I knew I could talk to God, I was so scared sometimes that I didn't want to. And so that verse really spoke to me like that. And it says in that verse in Hebrews that we have not come to that mountain, but instead we have come to Mount Zion. And then it tells us all about that. And it talks about how the mountain that we've come to through Jesus is one without fear, that our names are written in his book, that we have the blood of Jesus to cover us, that we are firstborns with Jesus. These are all the things it talks about in that verse. And it was such an eye-opening experience, because when I thought about that more, I realized, even though I knew that Jesus had died for me so that I could be close to God, I wasn't really living like that because I was too afraid. And so once I read that verse and started going to small group and really living out my faith, I realized that, I can have joy and I can have peace and I can be actually really excited about faith, because I know that Jesus' blood covers me. And I used to think that I had to do it all on my own, like I had to be perfect and make it all right. But knowing that Jesus did that for us is so helpful and really makes me, now I live by that. Now I'm not as afraid because I know that Jesus has died for me, and that that he's raised again. And so I think for people that maybe grew up in the church, or they've heard about Jesus and they, think, well, how does that apply to my life? Or maybe they've heard of God, but they think he's just this scary guy that's up in the sky looking down on them, and it feels really distant. I would just encourage people, like, really think about the fact that Jesus, when he died on the cross, he was thinking about you, and he knows you, and he wants you, and he wants to be in relationship with you. And it's not someone that's distant and scary, but it's someone that's close, like a friend, and his blood covers you. When he died on the cross, that covered all of your sins, and that you could never do anything to separate yourself from that as long as you believe. So that's like, that really changed my life, and I've been living by that since. Obviously, I've had a lot of struggles since then, but having that truth in my life has made such a big difference. So, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like talking about the struggles and stuff, that would have really helped too. Like when you had like fear, I think you were saying fear. And
Yeah.
was there any like struggles that you had to go through that maybe when you came to college or like that would really like, that it was like maybe you saw darkness, but you saw all the light come?
That's a good question. I used to be really afraid of like being sick, and I would always think like, oh, I must have cancer. Like, if you would ask my friends back then, I would always be saying like, what's this dot on my arm, or like, why do I have headaches? And that was a really scary way to live, because I was always thinking about like death, and especially like I said, after my uncle passed away, I was just really afraid. And once I came out of that darkness and started believing like God has a plan for my life, one, I believed that he wanted me to live, and so I wasn't as afraid, but also I know that my life is in his hands, and even though anything could happen to me at any moment, I have Jesus, and I know that my eternity rests with him. And that's kind of come back up too. Like, it's not like all of a sudden it was gone forever. There's been times, even recently, you know, I'm pregnant right now, and sometimes kind of scary things happen when you're pregnant, and I feel like even though those moments have come up, I've reminded myself, okay, I know that God has a plan for me, that he is with me, that he has given me peace. And even if I feel anxious, deep down I know that he's there. And so I feel like sometimes we expect it to be like all of a sudden everything's gone, like all our anxiety's gone, and it's not always like that. It's not perfect, but it's given me so much peace. And there was a specific moment even recently, like in the last maybe 6 months, where I was just feeling super anxious, and I was praying like, God, like, please take this away, you know? And I felt him say like, I am with you even in this moment, even when you're still anxious. And so that was really helpful too, because it's like, oh, even though I'm feeling anxious, I'm not separated from God. I'm still with him, and he'll sit with me through it. So that was really helpful too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. So what has God been like doing with you now?
Yeah.
Like what's some like exciting stuff he's been doing now from
all that time ago? I know. Well, it's crazy because now I've been graduated from college for, I don't know, like 8 years almost, which is wild. I know. But God has really helped me to be more bold in like sharing my faith and really leading other people. My husband and I help lead the youth, which is really great. And it's cool because like I can kind of see some of the things that I went through back in high school, like what I was talking about. Like if I see people going through that, I can share my story, which is great. But yeah, like I said, God's also been really speaking to me. It's almost like that verse I shared in Hebrews. I hadn't thought about it in a long time, but a couple weeks ago he brought it back up to me because I have been feeling more anxious again, but he's been reminding me like, these are the things I spoke to you. And so just sharing that with others. You know, I think when you get older too, like when you're young and you're in college, everything's so exciting and there's new stuff happening all the time. And sometimes when you get older, it's like, oh, wow, how do I really live this out when it's just like this daily life, you know? And so I've been trying to learn that, like, okay, not maybe new things are happening every day. And I'm not like, you know, college was so busy and fun, which my life still is really fun, but it's just different. And so how do I still have that faith? And I've been really working on that, like daily relationship with God, meeting with him every day, not being afraid to go spend time with him, you know, and that's been really helpful too. So, yeah.
So when you like spend time with the Lord, what does it look like for you on a daily basis?
Yeah, I try to do it every day. I try to do it in the mornings because I feel like that's better for me. Yeah. But I really like to start by reading like a couple chapters usually. I don't know why. That's just the way that I feel like the most connected is like through the word of God. And so once I've read, I try to like pray through those scriptures. So like say the reading that I'm reading for the day is a psalm, then I'll really read back through it and like really pray about it and pray through it. And I also like to read like commentaries on it. And like maybe even read some of the Hebrew words, like, oh, what do those words mean? You know, because it's helpful to really dive in. I know not everyone's like a big reader. Some people are more like they like to worship and pray when they start their time. I just like to start by reading because it helps ground me. And then what I'm working on is spending more time in prayer too, because sometimes after I read, I'm like, okay, great. But I need to also take that, what I read, and really pray about it and pray through it. And something that I recently have been learning about, actually through a conference that I went to here in the area, is just really vertical prayer, and how can we spend all of our prayer time focused on Jesus and on God, and not just on like a list of things that we need. But so that's been helpful, because when I read those verses, then I could pray through them, and it helps me stay focused on God, instead of just like, okay, Lord, here's my things, these are all the things I need. But instead it's like, okay, this is what I'm praying for, this is who you are. Also like looking in the Bible for the promises that God says, like, you've promised this, or this is what you say in your word. And so praying that back to him. That's not my idea, I heard it at a conference, but it was super helpful to hear, because you know, sometimes when you go to pray, you're like, what do I even say? Like, where do I start? But if you have a verse that you could pray through, like, it'll help you start. And a lot of the Psalms, and other parts of the Bible, and like letters from Paul, things like that, there's actual prayers in the Bible, so you could read them and pray them. And that's really helpful too. Because I'm not necessarily the type of person that like could sit down and just say a bunch of stuff, but I need something to guide me. So, yeah.
So, could you say prayer a lot? Like, what if like God done with you in prayer? Like, has there been like maybe he's done like healing, or done like what has God done?
I think healing from a lot of anxiety, for sure. Like, I used to, when I was feeling anxious, I would be afraid to pray, because it felt like, oh, if I start praying, I'm going to think even more about what I'm anxious about. Like, you know, when you're feeling anxious, you just try to stay busy so that you don't think about it. And when I've actually taken the time to stop and pray, it's crazy how much I feel like in my spirit that I'm actually being changed, you know. And I'm sure you've had these moments too, like when you can feel like the real peace of God come over you, like it really feels different. And whenever you're anxious, like your body feels it too. And so like in moments of prayer, when I've chosen to like actually sit with God, like I was saying, that moment I had recently, like it really actually feels different. Like I could feel it in my body. I feel God's presence. And even though it's scary at first, because I want to just pretend I'm not anxious or hide from the things I'm thinking about, or just distract myself, when I actually sit down to do it, I'm like, oh wow. So now I've been trying to do it in the morning and at night, because I get really anxious at night too, actually. I don't know why, but in the mornings I'm usually fine, but by nighttime, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but it's like sometimes right before bed you're like thinking about everything. And so I'm trying to use those moments to just pray instead, so that I'm not just sitting in my bed thinking about anything that worries me. So yeah, definitely some healing from that. And just, it's kind of like when you make it a daily habit, it changes you over time. Maybe not the very first time. It's not like a huge, it can be, but it's not always this big moment. But if you do it every day, you'll notice like, oh, over time when I have this habit. And that's something that, you know, we share a lot with the youth, because they're young and we want them to start it young. Like, have a daily habit of praying, because every day if you do something, over time it'll make a huge impact on your life, you know, versus just only doing it on Sundays, or, you know, only doing it when you have a big problem. But if you're really praying every day, it's going to make a huge difference in your life. And I've seen that in my life for sure. Yeah,
So cool. I think also too with prayer, it's like one thing I encourage people to, with like before you go to bed, or when you wake up, always say, Jesus, come and meet with me. And I feel like when you do that, I feel like before you go to bed and when you wake up, you're just gonna feel so different. And it, like she was saying, it will take time to feel that. But when you pray, you guys, daily, and you try to do that a lot, it will help your relationship. It would help what's going on in your life. It'll help your surroundings. It will help you having dreams. stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's really important to do that, because it's cool that you learn that, when you fully focus on that, it really like helps you a lot.
Yeah.
One thing that I think would be cool too is you work with the youth, you and Tim work with the youth. What is like, because I think I have some youth that do watch,
Yeah.
but what is some stuff that we could encourage like the youth, like, or what are you doing right now
Yeah.
to encourage these youth to do, like, when they step out of
Yeah.
the high school world?
That's a great question. I think, unfortunately, youth today deal with so many different things, like being online, being on the internet, like, peer pressure and all those things. And we've really noticed, especially with after the pandemic, like kids doing school online, it's harder for people to connect and have real relationships. But what we really encourage for our youth is like have a real relationship with God and have a real relationship with other people. Because I think if you're like, if you're in your room and you're on your phone all day, you could feel like you did a lot because you're like, oh, I saw all these cool things and I did all this stuff. But if you're not really connecting with people, or you're not really connecting with God, it's not going to really change your life. And so obviously, take time to rest too, but find ways to get into communities that you can learn about God. Like that's why Tim and I open up our house every Sunday for the youth, because we want them to be in real relationship with not only their friends, but with God. And I would really encourage youth to really seek an authentic relationship with God, not something that's fake and not something that you're just pretending, but really authentic, that is really your own, and it looks different for everyone. So it doesn't have to look the same as your parents, or it doesn't have to look the same as your friends, but take what you've learned from those people and make it your own. And don't be afraid to really have that faith in your life, because I know it feels scary when, like, maybe your friends don't believe, or you're at a big high school and they don't talk about God, and so it just feels different. But really being bold. I know that you've always been really bold, Jeremy, and like sharing your faith, and you're a great example of that, because you haven't been afraid to talk about God, even when it feels like the people around you, aren't encouraging you to do that. And so I think that's a really good example of like living in faith and being bold and having a real relationship with God.
Yeah. And also too, like, for the youth too, like, you probably have when you're like, there's some that'll be struggling, there's some that'll be going through it, maybe bullied, depressed, or all that thing. The one thing is too, it's just to get that foundation to be in a group, even like a youth group or anything, because it does help. It does help a lot. And I've connected with some of the youth that are like, man, I go to this youth group and it's so amazing. And especially for Tim and Maeve, they're amazing people.
Thank you.
And like, I love these guys. I've known them. I tell people too long, but it's just that the heart of a lot of these pastors, youth pastors have, they do have more of a heart for them. Some youth don't, but I just feel like if you're there in that spot and you need help, or if you're in my area, you can always leave a comment and I can try to direct you. But before we close this out, I always say this at the end. If there's something that's like on your, if you don't mind encouraging the viewers, people now watching it, what would be like something that you would want to encourage them that they're watching this right now? I know we've done a lot, but what is something?
I think if I want to encourage people one thing, it's to not stop seeking God. The Bible talks about like keep seeking, keep knocking, and kind of like what I was talking about with having a daily relationship with Him. Like, don't give up. And if you're in a really hard place, or if you maybe haven't talked to God in a long time, or if you've been, a Christian for a long time, but you just haven't really felt like you were connected, like, don't give up and keep trying. And every day is not going to be necessarily a miracle, but like we talked about, like if you keep seeking Him, He will speak to you. And one more encouragement too that I didn't share from earlier, but when I do my daily reading and prayer, I always try to leave with one word that I can take through my day. And whatever it is that I read that spoke to me, like I try to write it down. It could be a phrase or a word, but like, don't let your life go by without getting words from God and hearing from Him, because that's what's going to change you. And so I would really encourage you right now, like wherever you're at, you know, whether it's tonight before bed or tomorrow morning, even if you haven't done it in a long time, try it. Just try giving 5 minutes, you know, either reading your Bible, praying, or writing one thing down. Like, just try to connect with God. And even if it starts small, like, that's what we always tell the youth, like, it could start really small, but that's still going to impact you. So I would encourage you to do that today, tomorrow, whenever you can do it. Try to do it. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Till next time.
Thanks,
J-Love,
everyone.
Maeve are out. Bye-bye.